a millionaire CEO, married his assistant for business, but her goodbye letter exposed his heart. Hello everyone, please subscribe and turn on the bell to support our channel. It's free and helps us a lot. Where are you watching from? Tell us below. Now, let's get back to our story. Ethan Walker had built his empire with the same precision he used to build his steel and glass corporate headquarters towering over Manhattan. To the outside world, he was the kind of man who didn't blink, didn't bend, and definitely didn't believe in love. Which is why everyone froze the morning he announced he was getting married. No dating rumors, no fiancé spotted, no romantic history at all. Just a sudden wedding to his assistant of 3 years, Grace Miller. The office buzzed for weeks, and every hallway conversation circled back to the same question: why her? Ethan had a simple answer. He needed stability before the biggest merger of his career, and his board wanted proof that he could be the kind of man who projected a settled image. A wife made that easier. A real relationship didn't interest him. Grace was efficient, calm, loyal, and never asked for anything. In his mind, she was the perfect person to sign the dotted line. What he didn't see was the way her smile stiffened the moment he slid the contract across his desk. She didn't ask for time to think. She didn't negotiate terms. She simply nodded with a quiet breath and said, "If that's what you need, I'll do it." Ethan thought her acceptance was professional maturity. Lucas Grant, his best friend, saw something entirely different. At the engagement dinner, Lucas leaned over and whispered, "You don't see it, do you? That girl looks at you like she's trying to lock her heart in a box." Ethan brushed it off. Love complicated people. Grace wasn't complicated. She was steady, predictable, and always exactly where he needed her. Their wedding was private, hosted in a penthouse overlooking the Hudson River. Ethan stood in his tailored suit, reciting vows written by an attorney. Grace recited hers too, but her voice trembled so gently that even the officiant paused. When she slipped her hand into Ethan's, her fingers were cold, and for the first time he wondered if maybe she wasn't as unshakable as he'd always assumed. Their marriage settled into a quiet routine. Ethan maintained emotional distance while Grace handled schedules, travel, charity events, and every part of his life that required warmth he didn't know how to offer. She never complained. She never asked for more, yet small moments kept catching him off guard. Like the way she brewed his coffee the exact temperature he preferred without asking, or how she gently reminded him to call his mother on her birthday. Or how she stayed awake beside him during late-night strategy sessions just so he wouldn't feel the weight of a silent office. He told himself it didn't matter. She had agreed to terms. She understood this wasn't love. Still, there were nights Ethan caught Grace staring out the window of their penthouse, clutching a blanket around her shoulders, her eyes reflecting a sadness she never voiced. He didn't ask. He avoided anything that felt like intimacy. The merger approached, and Ethan poured himself into work, chasing numbers, projections, and board approvals. Grace was always at his side, softly managing the edges of his chaos, until one Thursday morning when she didn't show up. At first, Ethan assumed she was sick. By noon, irritation replaced concern. By evening, unease crept in. Grace never disappeared. He entered the penthouse expecting to find her resting. Instead, the apartment was spotless, strangely still, almost staged. And on the dining table lay a single envelope with his name written in her delicate handwriting, Ethan. His stomach tightened. Something felt wrong. He opened the letter, expecting a polite explanation. What he found instead would shatter every assumption he had ever made about her, and about himself. The letter in Ethan's hands felt heavier than paper should ever feel. Grace's handwriting flowed in soft curves, every line steady, every word chosen with painful care. She thanked him for trusting her with his world, for allowing her to stand beside him in rooms she once dreamed of only from a distance, and for the quiet moments she treasured even when she knew they were never meant for her. She wrote that she could no longer stay in a marriage that reminded her every morning that her heart was involved while his was kept locked behind walls she could not reach. She apologized for leaving without a conversation because she knew if he asked her to stay, she would say yes. The final line read, "Please do not look for me. You deserve someone who wants the same kind of love you do." Ethan read the sentence again, confused by the implication that he wanted any kind of love at all. He had built his life around structure, discipline, and control. Love had never been part of the plan. He folded the letter with deliberate care, but his hands were no longer steady. The penthouse felt colder than usual, too quiet, missing the soft footsteps he never realized he listened for. He walked through each room, searching for any sign of where she had gone. Her closet was empty. Her favorite mug was gone. The blanket she used every night by the window was folded neatly on the couch. Nothing remained except the ghost of her presence. Lucas arrived after Ethan called him with a voice stretched thin. The moment he saw Ethan holding the folded letter, he muttered, "I told you she was putting her heart on the line." Ethan ignored the comment, pacing the living room like a man searching for a missing piece of himself. He insisted the marriage had been a contract, an arrangement, a logical decision. Lucas finally stepped in front of him and asked a question that hit harder than the letter. "If it was only a contract, why do you look like you just lost your entire world?" Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. His thoughts were tangled, memories forming a trail he had never bothered to examine. The way Grace covered him with a blanket when he fell asleep at his desk. The quiet patience she carried in every conversation. The softness in her eyes when she looked at him, even when she thought he did not notice. He felt something unfamiliar, a pull in his chest that he could not label. He returned to her letter, searching for a clue, a hint of where she might have gone. There was none. Grace had always been thoughtful, but she had also been private. She rarely spoke about her life outside work. She never mentioned family visits or personal plans. The realization struck him with a sharp sting. He had been married to her, lived with her, relied on her, yet he knew almost nothing about her past, her dreams, or the world she came from. He had treated Grace like an anchor for his schedule rather than a partner in his life. Lucas rested a hand on his shoulder and said, "You need to figure out what you are actually feeling. Once you do, then you go find her." Ethan finally let himself breathe. The merger could wait. The board could wait. The world could wait. Grace had left because she thought he could never feel anything for her. He needed to prove she was wrong. He placed the letter back into the envelope, straightened his suit out of habit, and grabbed his keys. This time, he was not chasing a deal or a strategy. He was chasing the one person who had slipped through his fingers without ever asking for more than a place in his life. The city lights flickered across the windshield as he drove into the night, searching for a woman who had spent years standing right beside him while he failed to see her fully. He had no idea where she had gone, but he knew one truth with absolute clarity. He would not stop until he found Grace Miller. The night stretched into early morning as Ethan followed every thread he could remember about Grace, piecing together tiny fragments of her life that he had never bothered to ask about before. He drove past her favorite coffee shop on Fifth Avenue, the one where she always picked up a latte before work, but the barista said she had not been there in days. He stopped by the small bookstore she visited on weekends. The place she once mentioned had the best view of the city from its second floor. Yet the owner shook his head, offering only a sympathetic smile when Ethan showed him her picture. The realization settled heavier and heavier on his chest that Grace had not just left the penthouse. She had stepped out of the entire orbit of his world. Back in his car, Ethan gripped the steering wheel and replayed the last months of their marriage in brutal clarity. The subtle way Grace withdrew from conversations, the quiet sighs she thought he did not hear, the way she lingered by the window at night, as if preparing herself to let go. He had mistaken those signs as exhaustion from work, but they were silent goodbyes she had been practicing long before she walked out. He drove to the office next, hoping to find something she might have left behind. Her desk, once filled with sticky notes and neatly stacked reports, sat spotless, her drawers empty, her monitor wiped clean. She had even removed the small framed photo of the sunrise over Lake Michigan, the only personal item she ever kept at work. Ethan stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space, realizing just how deeply he had taken her presence for granted. Lucas called, asking if he had found anything, and Ethan answered with a strained voice that he had not. Lucas reminded him gently that Grace was a planner, someone who moved deliberately, someone who would choose a place that gave her peace. The moment Ethan heard that, a memory surfaced, faint but clear. One rainy night months ago, Grace had mentioned a cabin she used to visit in upstate New York when she needed to think. A quiet place surrounded by pine trees and a lake that stayed perfectly still at dawn. Ethan had barely acknowledged the comment back then, but now it felt like a lifeline. Without hesitating, he grabbed the letter again and searched for anything that might confirm it. But Grace had written nothing about where she went, only how she felt. Still, the cabin was the only real clue he had. He got back into his car and began the 3-hour drive north, the city lights fading behind him as the highway stretched into open darkness. The farther he drove, the more he understood the weight of his mistakes. He had built an empire but never built trust. He had made decisions but never made space for emotion. He had offered Grace security but never offered himself. Dawn was breaking by the time he reached the old wooden sign that marked the turn toward the lake road. The sky was streaked with pale orange, reminding him of the photo Grace kept on her desk. The gravel road was quiet, lined with tall pines swaying gently in the morning breeze. When he approached the cabin, his heart pounded hard enough to hurt. The place looked like a memory brought to life, small and warm, smoke rising faintly from the chimney. Ethan stepped out of the car, every breath tight with anticipation and fear. As he walked toward the porch, he saw a familiar mug resting on the railing, the same blue ceramic mug she had taken from the penthouse. It was the first sign that he had been right. She was here. He raised his hand to knock, but before he could, the door opened slowly, and Grace stood there, barefoot, wrapped in a sweater, her eyes widening the moment she saw him, a mix of surprise, hurt, and something he could not name. Ethan swallowed hard, realizing this was the first time he had ever truly looked at her, not as his assistant, not as a contractual wife, but as the woman whose absence had unraveled him completely. Grace stood frozen in the doorway, her fingers tightening around the edge of the sweater as if bracing for a storm she had already weathered once. Ethan felt the weight of her silence settle between them, heavier than the 3-hour drive and heavier than every unspoken feeling he had ignored for years. He took a slow breath and said her name, not as a command or a call from a boss to an employee, but with a softness he did not know he was capable of. Grace stepped back politely, allowing him inside, yet her eyes remained cautious, like someone preparing to protect a fragile piece of herself. The cabin was warm, lit by soft light from the fireplace, and Ethan noticed the small details immediately. A folded blanket on the couch, a half-finished cup of tea on the table, and the same blue mug resting near the window. Every item echoed her need to create comfort, something she had always done without him ever noticing until now. He stood in the middle of the small living room, unsure of where to start. Grace finally broke the silence with a quiet voice, asking why he was there. The question struck him with a painful clarity because he realized she genuinely believed he would never chase her, never fight for her, never choose her. He explained how he had searched the city, how he visited every place she had touched with even the smallest piece of her life, and how everything led him here. Grace listened, her expression steady, yet her eyes flickered with disbelief and fear. She reminded him that their marriage had been an arrangement, that he had never given her a reason to believe he felt anything deeper, and that leaving had been the only way she knew to protect her own heart. Ethan stepped closer, careful not to crowd her, and said he had been wrong about many things. He admitted he had spent years building walls that shut everyone out, including the one person who had stood by him through every storm. He confessed that he had mistaken her gentleness for professionalism and her loyalty for obligation. Grace shook her head slowly, tears forming even as she tried to keep her voice steady. She told him she could not return to a life where she felt invisible, where her heart carried all the weight and his stayed untouched. Ethan felt her words strike every part of him that he had spent years training himself not to feel. He told her he never meant to hurt her, that he had never realized how much she had given until he walked into an office stripped of her presence, and felt the emptiness, like a physical blow. He tried to explain the shift inside him, the unfamiliar pull that started the moment he read her letter, but the words felt clumsy and heavy. Grace wiped her cheek and reminded him that realization did not equal love. She asked him what he wanted from her, truly wanted, not as a CEO or as a man used to making decisions for strategic gain. Ethan struggled for an answer and understood in that moment how deeply he had misjudged his own heart. He reached into his pocket and unfolded the letter she left on the penthouse table. He told her that every line in that letter had revealed a truth he had ignored for far too long. He said he wanted a marriage that was real, not built on convenience or image, but on the connection he had been too closed off to recognize. Grace stepped back, shaken, unsure whether she could trust his sudden shift. Ethan saw the hesitation in her eyes and felt an ache rise from the center of his chest. He told her he was not asking for an answer that day, and he was not asking her to return to the life she ran from. He was asking for a chance to show her the man he could be if she let him try. The fireplace crackled softly, filling the silence between them as Grace looked at him with a mixture of longing and fear. She whispered that she did not know if her heart could handle being hurt again. Ethan nodded with a seriousness that reached deeper than any promise he had ever made. He told her he would earn every step of trust, no matter how long it took. The moment hung in the air, fragile and trembling, as Grace lowered her gaze and whispered his name for the first time since he arrived. The sound of it felt like the beginning of something he had never allowed himself to hope for. Grace sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, her fingers curling around the sleeve of her sweater as if anchoring herself in the middle of emotions she had tried so hard to outrun. Ethan remained standing for a moment, unsure whether he should move closer or give her space, and the uncertainty on his face was something she had never seen from him before. She finally asked him why it had taken losing her for him to realize anything at all, and her voice carried a mixture of exhaustion and heartache that made his chest tighten. Ethan admitted he had been blind to what mattered, consumed by his work and the protective armor he had worn since he was young. He told her that success had become a shield, one that kept him from feeling anything that might slow him down or make him vulnerable, and Grace was the first person who ever slipped through the cracks in that armor. She looked at him carefully, almost studying him, trying to determine if the words came from genuine reflection or from panic at losing stability. Ethan sensed her doubt and told her plainly that he had not come to the cabin to reclaim convenience. He had come because her absence had exposed a truth he could not ignore. The silence stretched long enough for him to wonder if he had already ruined his chances before he even began. But then Grace spoke again, her voice softer this time. She explained that loving him had never been easy, because he never let her close enough to see where she stood with him, and that she had spent 3 years giving pieces of her heart to a man who treated their connection like a line item on a corporate contract. Ethan lowered himself onto the coffee table in front of her, close enough for her to see the sincerity in his eyes but still giving her room to pull away if she needed. He told her that he understood why she had left, that she deserved better than a half-formed relationship, and that he had come to offer something he had never offered anyone: honesty about his feelings. He confessed that he had started to depend on her long before the marriage began, not just for work or routine, but for the stability and calm she brought into a life he had built on constant pressure. He told her that the thought of her being gone had felt like someone had cut the foundation out from under him. Grace listened, her expression wavering between hope and fear, and she asked him what he wanted from her if trust had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Ethan replied that he wanted to start again, not from the day they signed the contract, but from the moment they met, as two people willing to learn each other with honesty instead of assumptions. Grace looked away, her breath shaky, and she admitted there was a part of her that wanted to believe him, and another part terrified of falling back into a pattern where she poured herself into a relationship alone. Ethan reached out slowly, letting his hand hover near hers without touching, showing her he would not take more than she offered. He promised that he would never ask her to return to the penthouse or the marriage unless she wanted it on her own terms, and he promised she would never again be left guessing about her place in his life. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, and she whispered that the hurt she carried did not disappear just because he showed up, and Ethan nodded, saying he understood, and that healing would take time. The fire crackled softly, sending warm light across her face as she finally placed her hand in his, the gesture small but filled with meaning. It was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was an opening, a fragile beginning that neither of them dared to break. Ethan felt relief wash through him, not because the problem was solved, but because she had given him a chance, and he vowed silently that he would not squander it. Grace met his eyes, and for the first time since he arrived, the fear in her gaze softened into something he recognized as possibility. The morning light filtered gently through the cabin windows as Grace and Ethan sat across from each other, their hands resting loosely together on the couch, neither of them ready to break the fragile peace that had settled between them. Grace withdrew her hand slowly, not out of rejection but as if needing space to breathe, and Ethan respected the movement without hesitation, watching her with a careful patience he never used to show. She stood and walked toward the small kitchen, making tea like she had done countless times in their penthouse, and Ethan felt an ache of familiarity mixed with guilt as he realized how many moments like this he had taken for granted. When she handed him a cup, her eyes held the same hesitation as the night before, and he understood that trust would not return simply because he wished for it. Grace finally spoke, saying that the life she left behind felt like a world built around him, not them, and she needed to know if anything would truly be different. Ethan nodded, acknowledging the truth, and told her that he had spent years assuming emotional distance meant strength. Yet, losing her had revealed how empty his life was without connection. She listened, but did not let his words sway her too quickly. She told him she needed clarity, not promises spoken in the heat of regret. Ethan took a slow breath and explained that when he walked into her empty office, he realized how deeply he had depended on her presence, not just for support, but because she brought warmth into a life he had allowed to become cold and mechanical. Grace asked him a question he had feared hearing since he arrived, whether he loved her or whether he simply hated the feeling of losing control. Ethan paused, recognizing the weight of her doubt, and answered with more honesty than he had ever given anyone. He told her he did not understand love when they married, that he had buried his emotions for so long he forgot how to name them, but that every moment without her felt like losing something irreplaceable. He said he was not chasing her to restore comfort, but because she had become the one person he could not imagine his future without. Grace lowered her gaze, her breath unsteady, and admitted she had loved him long before the marriage, long before the contract, and long before he ever noticed her as more than the person who smoothed out the chaos of his schedule. She told him the pain came not from loving him, but from loving a man who never seemed capable of seeing her heart. Ethan felt the words hit him with a quiet force, and he leaned forward, telling her he saw her now, fully, and that he wanted the chance to know her beyond the walls he had built. Grace walked to the window, looking out at the still lake surrounded by tall pine trees, the same trees she once used as a place of escape. Ethan joined her but kept a respectful distance, allowing her the space to process. She finally said that rebuilding their relationship would mean starting from zero, learning each other as people, not roles. And he agreed without hesitation, telling her that he wanted to earn her trust the same way she had given him unconditional loyalty for years. She turned toward him with a vulnerability that made his heart tighten, asking what would happen to the merger, the company, and the life they had left behind in New York. Ethan said he had already postponed the upcoming meetings, that nothing mattered more than resolving what he had broken, and the sincerity in his voice made her eyes soften. Grace stepped closer, close enough for him to feel the warmth of her presence, and she whispered that she was willing to try, not to return to the past, but to see if something real could grow from the pieces of what they once had. Ethan felt a quiet surge of relief, not triumphant or demanding, but grateful, deeply grateful, for a chance he knew he did not deserve but would work endlessly to honor. The fireplace crackled behind them as she reached for his hand again, this time without hesitation, and for the first time since their wedding day, they stood together not as partners bound by obligation, but as two people willing to rebuild something genuine, fragile, and real. The day after Grace agreed to try rebuilding their relationship, the cabin felt different, lighter somehow, as if the walls themselves sensed the shift between them. Ethan woke early and stepped outside to let her rest, standing on the porch where the morning air carried the scent of pine and the distant call of birds echoing across the lake. He had spent years waking up to a calendar full of meetings, deadlines, and strategic decisions, yet this quiet morning felt more important than any boardroom victory he had ever achieved. When Grace joined him outside, wrapped in her sweater and holding her blue ceramic mug, she looked at him with a softness that had been absent for too long. She thanked him for giving her space the night before, and Ethan replied that he wanted to learn how to meet her needs instead of assuming she would adapt to his world. They spent the morning talking, not about the company or responsibilities, but about memories, fears, and the pieces of their lives that had never been shared. Grace told him about the grandmother who raised her, the summers she spent volunteering at a local library, and the fear she carried that love, once given, would never be returned. Ethan shared pieces of himself he had never revealed to anyone, explaining how his father taught him that vulnerability was weakness, and how that teaching had shaped every decision he made as an adult. Grace listened gently, seeing him not as the unreachable CEO but as a man shaped by scars he never acknowledged. As the hours passed, the distance between them softened until their conversations felt natural, unforced, and warm. Later that afternoon, Grace suggested they take a walk to the lake, and Ethan agreed, letting her lead the way down the familiar path lined with tall pines. The sun filtered through the branches, casting moving shadows along the trail. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan allowed himself to simply be present, walking beside the woman he had nearly lost. When they reached the lake, Grace sat on a large, flat rock near the water, pulling her knees close as she watched the gentle ripples. Ethan sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth, but far enough to honor the boundaries she was still learning to trust. Grace admitted she still feared that the version of him she was seeing now might disappear once they returned to the city, swallowed by the demands of his position. Ethan told her he had already spoken to his board, informing them he would be taking a short leave, and her eyes widened in surprise because she knew how unprecedented that was. He explained that building a life with her was more important than maintaining the illusion of invincibility at work, and that he wanted to create a relationship built on presence, not obligation. Grace's expression softened, and she leaned her head gently against his shoulder, a gesture small but intimate enough to tighten his chest with emotion he no longer feared. He wrapped an arm around her carefully, letting the moment stretch in the quiet of the lakeside. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Grace turned to him and admitted she was willing to return to New York when the time felt right, but only if their home became a place where she was seen, valued, and loved. Ethan promised her it would be, not with grand declarations, but with consistency and daily intention. She nodded slowly, believing him in a way that came from seeing his actions rather than his words. When they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, the connection felt new, fragile, and real. A beginning shaped not by contracts or expectations, but by two people who chose each other with open hearts. In that quiet evening light, Ethan realized he was not just rebuilding a relationship, he was becoming a man capable of loving Grace in the way she had always deserved, and that truth settled into him with a depth that was both humbling and life-changing. The following morning, Ethan and Grace prepared to leave the cabin together, their suitcases resting near the door as sunlight streamed across the wooden floor, casting long golden lines that made the space feel like a chapter closing with quiet dignity. Grace paused before stepping outside, her hand resting on the doorknob as she looked around the small cabin that had held both her heartbreak and the fragile beginnings of hope. And Ethan understood immediately that this place would always mark the turning point in their story. He told her gently that they could stay longer if she needed more time, but Grace shook her head with a soft smile, explaining that healing could continue in New York just as well as here, as long as they moved forward together with intention rather than fear. The drive back toward the city was filled with moments of silence that did not feel uncomfortable, mixed with conversations that revealed more pieces of themselves than they had ever shared during the 3 years they spent working side by side. Grace opened up about her worries, admitting she feared being overshadowed by his demanding world again. While Ethan reassured her that he understood the responsibility he carried now and that he would protect their relationship with the same dedication he once reserved only for his company. As the skyline of Manhattan appeared in the distance, Grace felt her chest tighten with a mixture of nervousness and resolve, and Ethan reached over, intertwining his fingers with hers in a gesture both grounding and tender. He told her that they would take things at her pace, one step at a time, and she nodded, finding comfort in the steadiness of his voice. When they arrived at the penthouse, Grace hesitated before walking inside, remembering the nights she spent alone staring out the window, wondering why love felt so one-sided. Ethan noticed her hesitation and asked if she wanted a moment, but she took a breath and stepped forward, determined to reshape the memories held within those walls. The place looked the same physically, yet everything felt different because the man beside her had changed in ways she could feel even in the subtlety of his movements. Ethan brought her suitcase to the bedroom without assuming she would stay there permanently, placing it gently by the dresser and telling her she could choose any space that felt comfortable. The small act, so simple and respectful, made Grace realize he was not just trying to win her back but trying to honor her heart in ways he never had before. Over the next few days, Ethan adjusted his routines to include her presence, not as an afterthought but as a priority. He took breaks from work to share meals with her, asked her opinion on decisions he once made alone, and invited her into conversations that mattered, showing her she was no longer living in the shadow of his responsibilities. Grace watched these changes with cautious hope, testing each new gesture against the memory of the man he once was, and slowly, she saw consistency where there used to be distance. One evening, as they prepared dinner together in the kitchen, Grace accidentally knocked over a glass and immediately apologized, expecting the tension that used to follow any disruption. Instead, Ethan simply smiled, told her it was nothing, and helped her clean it up without frustration. And the small moment carried more weight than either of them expected because it revealed how much his patience had grown. Later that night, they sat on the terrace overlooking the city lights, wrapped in a shared blanket as the cool breeze moved through the air. Grace admitted she still felt afraid sometimes, still wondered if the life they were rebuilding would hold steady when the pressures of his world returned. And Ethan told her that love was not a contract or a performance. It was a choice he would make every single day, even on the days he failed or felt overwhelmed. He looked at her with a sincerity that settled deep inside her chest, telling her that she had become the grounding force he never knew he needed, and that he wanted their marriage to be built on honesty, empathy, and partnership. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered that she believed him, not because of his promises, but because of the man he had chosen to become since the day he found her letter on the dining table. In the quiet of that night, surrounded by the hum of New York City below them, they understood that their relationship was no longer an arrangement or a fragile hope. It was a commitment shaped by truth, rebuilt with intention, and held together by two hearts, learning to trust again. Toàn bị nội dung truyện thần âm thần.